Hi and welcome to this week's Wu Wei Wisdom, a life lessons teaching. It's great to be back with you all. Now, do you feel like you are stuck on a roller coaster of out of control, uncomfortable or painful feelings and emotions? Well, this week we are talking all about the emotional carousel of despair and how you can step off it. Okay, David, so the concept of the carousel of despair, I know this is an idea that you've created that has been very useful for working with your clients in helping them understand their feelings and emotions. Can you explain a little bit more about what it is?
Yes, I think a lot of people do find you very helpful, Alex, because I've got a really important saying. You can't change what you don't understand and then accept. So when I come up with these concepts like the carousel of despair, we're trying to explain what happens. Now, it normally manifests in your emotions. You're swinging around on a set of emotions. It could be anxiety, it could be fear, could be many emotions, guilt, anger, frustration, scared of being alone, being scared. And what you're doing is living your life almost being led around this circle of emotions and unable to get off this circle because one seems to lead to another, and then that leads to another, and that leads to another. So it's a pattern of an emotional pattern that you're experiencing. So to call it a carousel may give you an idea that you can step back and go, oh, yes, I see my pattern. I see what I'm doing here every day. It could be every hour. You see this pattern where you go from one emotion to the other and they're kind of linked.
Is that almost because when we experience one red light emotion, so say that's anxiety, that then draws all of our attention to that uncomfortable feeling, which then can make us create more red light emotions of panic, fear, hopelessness. And so it becomes compounding. So it's is it that we find ourselves on this carousel of despair because we are creating this daisy chain effect with our emotions rather than experiencing one emotion and then dealing with it and resolving it and dissolving it?
That's exactly right. That's the first step. And I try and repeat it on every teaching. So for those of you who've heard this literally hundreds of times, please listen to it and see whether you agree or you disagree. You are the creator of your emotions. You are not the victim of them. Let me clarify that for those few who misunderstood. I'm not saying you shouldn't have emotions. I'm not saying emotions are wrong. I'm saying the opposite. Emotions are wonderful. They make us human beings. The emotion of love, the emotion of confidence, joy, happiness, these are wonderful emotions. But you are the creator. Other people do not create emotions and somehow transport them into your body and you're the victim of them. That's the first thing to understand to get off the carousel, because as you just clearly explained, one emotion can lead to another. I like the word you just said, like a daisy chain. And then you're stuck on the very high level of emotion. And then you become the victim of the emotion. And that really is one of the most, if you take one thing away from this teaching, think about that teaching that I keep on giving you and make sure you understand it fully. Again, I'm not saying you shouldn't have emotions, but every emotion that you experience in your body, you are creating by the way you perceive something, the way you believe something, your interpretation, you are creating that emotion. And that's the first step of getting off the carousel.
And David, would you say that there is a real kind of compounding effect here? Because it's like if we are creating feelings of anxiety, perhaps because we are worried about a situation that's going on in our life. If we don't kind of address and rebalance those emotions and what's going on at a deeper level, and we let the anxiety almost like sap our emotional energy resources, then the next time a challenge happens to us, or someone says the wrong thing to us, or something becomes difficult, it can be an everyday thing, but there's a difficulty. Because we have allowed the original kind of red light feeling to draw our energy levels down, it means the next everyday challenge or difficulty, we're more likely to find it more challenging to be able to control the emotions. So it's like the longer we allow ourselves to stay on the carousel and allow this daisy chaining of emotions, negative emotions, to go on, it's almost like the harder it is to break the cycle, to get off the carousel, because it's, to be very illustrative about it, it's like it consumes us. It consumes, the emotions begin to consume all our energy and cloud out our logic, our resourcefulness, our ability to stay calm and think about things carefully and rationally.
Well, that's why I like the visualization of the carousel. So on your explanation, what happens is the carousel spins more quickly, faster and faster and faster. And then, like being on a carousel, you're just hanging on for grim death. And the most important thing is hanging on. And then, as you've quite rightly explained, the emotions become more powerful, more consuming, more overwhelming, because you're in kind of a survival mode. You're not thinking about nothing else except the emotional feeling.
Yeah.
And that's why it's very important to understand the way to get off this carousel, because if you're just stuck in that whizzing around of the carousel, that consumes you completely, because that's all you're doing is hanging on.
And Dave, I'm going to ask you what may seem like a strange question now. These emotions, we've spoken on a number of our videos that our emotions are the way in which our inner child communicates to us.
Yes.
So it's our inner child, part of our mind, or our out of balance ego, if you like, that's keeping us on the carousel,
Yes.
which is obviously not a very nice place to be, and not a very nice internal environment, destabilizing, tiring, unhappy place. But would you say that for the inner child, there is actually a payoff,
There's a benefit,
to staying? Now, a lot of people would really almost shout at me for saying that, because it's like, who on earth would want to stay in this place? That's perverse to want to stay in this place. But I'm wondering, for the inner child part of our mind, there is a benefit of staying on the carousel.
Well, it's more than a benefit, Alex. There's many benefits.
Okay.
So before we move on to that, which we will in a second, that's why it's so important to understand that you are creating the emotions. Once you've got that, then you can ask yourself, why? The golden thread question. Why am I creating these emotions? And as Alex has just explained very well, it is normally the part of your mind that you may be calling your subconscious mind or your ego. I would like to give the label the inner child, because not every time, but the majority of the time it relates back to your childhood experiences. Is the way that they view those situations, perceive them, the glasses that they're looking at the world through, is what sparks the emotion and then takes you to the higher level and spins you round as on the emotion. Now, to address your question, you're absolutely right, and I agree with you. I would say anybody who understands what we're talking about the carousel of despair, would be horrified when we say the part of your mind that we call the inner child gets a benefit, many benefits. Shall I give you some? Familiarity. The inner child really favors familiarity, what it's used to. Here's the paradox. Even if it's not successful, the inner child will favor that familiarity because perversely it believes it offers it some kind of control and certainty.
So are you saying that the familiarity is the uncomfortable feelings and emotions and the sense of emotional overwhelm, that is the familiar, comfortable environment that inner child part of our mind wants to live in?
Not wants to live in, it's familiar to live in that. That could be very similar to what they experience as childhood, that confusion, living in a home that perhaps emotions were very high, or when they were a child, they were using emotions and the emotions were not recognized or dealt with. So the only answer that they've got is to use the emotions. And that's why it's very familiar, because no one has ever addressed these issues and resolved the issues. So they will go to the familiarity. And again, this is going to sound really weird. In a very strange way, it's their comfort zone. Even though it's not successful, it will never work. It won't work now. It'll never work as in the future. And the inner child kind of knows that, but it doesn't know any other path. So it will stick to what it knows. I'm going to give you a saying I'm sure you've heard. Better the devil you know. And that's one of the reasons why the inner child will see a benefit in creating these red light feelings, which creates the daisy chain, spins the carousel faster and faster and faster. And then the inner child can then also perceive itself as the victim. Pooh me, pooh me. Nobody listens to me. No one understands me. I can't control it. I can't cope. I'm not good enough. I'm unlovable. I'm unworthy. Then it starts to spin all of the lies, which is actually spinning the carousel faster and faster and faster. And the inner child is hanging on for grim death.
And so in next week's teaching, David, we are going to be tackling the subject of self-responsibility and blaming others and victim mindset. So we'll dig into that a lot deeper next week. So please do tune in for that.
Can I just say something now? I am not blaming the inner child. There's no blame here. The inner child doesn't know anything different. And that's why there's a benefit. Can I give you another benefit? Again, there's quite a few benefits. I won't go through them all. But again, those of you who are on the carousel or experience the carousel will resist what I'm going to say. Your inner child is a bit of a drama queen. And creating emotion gets them attention. And so there's a benefit in that. It will do it, as Alex said. The emotions are normally the voice of the inner child. See if this applies to you. Normally, the inner child is not being listened to, not being addressed, is being shut down, is being locked down, is carrying on until the inner child says, I'm going to do something that gets your attention. Let's create some really strong fear, anxiety, tension, overwhelm. Then you'll do something. Then you'll pay attention to me. And that is a very strong way for many of my clients, this attention seeking. And that's why I like the analogy of the inner child. It acts like a child, screaming for attention, having temper tantrums, throwing a temper tantrum. I love what the Chinese call it, squealing piglets. You know, when you take a piglet off mother and it screams like crazy because it wants what it wants. So there's the number 3. I could go on, there's so many. The inner child wants what it wants, when it wants it, how it wants it. It has very high expectations about how people should be, how the world should be, how things should come its way, how much effort it should put into it. It puts a great emphasis on entitlement. What's it? Oh my goodness, you see, I can carry on and on. I'm sure we'll do more teachings on this. That perversely, for the inner child, there is a benefit of the carousel of despair.
And also, David, I think it's worth saying that when you see the inner child part of our mind can be a bit of a drama queen or king, we're not talking about in response to life-threatening or very serious life situations. We're just talking in the context of everyday challenges and difficulties that are essentially a part of life. So this is, because quite rightly, if we were facing a life-threatening or very dangerous situation, it would be entirely appropriate for us to create red light emotions and then use those as a kind of call to action. But what we're talking about is the continuous creation of red light emotions and then letting that sap our energy and then having this carousel or this daisy chain effect in response to ongoing, everyday, normal life situations that unfortunately are part of adulting.
But it's very important that you highlighted that, Alex, because when people listen to this teaching, their inner child is listening as well.
Yeah.
And the inner child will go to the extreme. Oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's saying, I shouldn't have emotions. He's saying emotions. I'm not saying emotions are wrong. And your definition is absolutely right. So if something really important happens to you, health, family, death, whatever, it's normal, natural, and you should create emotions. But that's different to the carousel. That's different to the emotion continually going round and around and around. The emotion rises and then goes away, like a wave.
Yeah.
Rises appropriately, stays for as long as it should stay, and then recedes. And that's how emotions should be, like a wave coming and going. If that's not what is happening to you and you're just going round and around and they're getting stronger and stronger and stronger and you are being sucked under it, that's what we're talking about.
And so just going back to what you were saying before about this inner child recreating the negative emotions because it's familiar and perversely it sees it as comfortable or safe. So what you're saying is if as a child we experienced uncertain situations, tumultuous situations, situations where we just didn't understand what was going on and it felt unsafe, unstable, or like there was something wrong with us, there was something bad going on. We then experienced quite rightly, quite naturally, these red light emotions.
Yes.
So now what we're doing as adults, when we encounter everyday challenging, difficult situations which are uncertain, tumultuous, unstable in the same way but different in our adult life, what you're saying is we're no longer that child, but there is still a part of our psyche which has that childlike response, and that's what we're calling the inner child. And because that's what we quite naturally, quite rightly did when we were a child, because we didn't understand what was going on, now we are doing exactly the same thing. It's creating the red light emotions in response to challenges or difficulties. And if we don't address it, then we can often find ourselves on this carousel.
And that's what I said earlier on. You cannot change what you don't understand. So what we're trying to do is to get you to understand it and then accept it. Because once you accept it, and we've done videos on acceptance and why it's such a powerful teaching, now you can start to do something about it. And here's the life lesson. Because under those emotions, which start the spiral, the carousel, the daisy chain, whichever you want to call it, the circling around and being overwhelmed by the emotion. There is a belief. And that's why the golden thread process is so important. Because if it's fear, then you can acknowledge the red light feeling. I would prefer to call it a red light feeling, and ask yourself, why have I chosen? Listen to the wording. This is very important. The inner child will now resist this wording that I'm going to give you. Why have I chosen to create this red light feeling? Now you're moving away from the emotional carousel and you're going to the motor that's driving it. Mm-hmm. That's the important thing. Rather than focusing on the spinning emotional carousel going faster and faster, let's look at the motor that's spinning and why it's spinning. It's a little bit like reverse engineering. You're tracing back the wire and seeing what's going on with the motor. Now, the motor are your beliefs and your thoughts. And as we've tried to explain, not every time, but the majority of the time, these are formed in childhood, around the age of 6 years old to 9 years old. In my experience, working with clients is very relevant. What was going on there was very important, because that kind of conducts or creates, would be a better word, your belief system. And our belief system are like the software that runs the computer. And so I say this as well in all the videos. Be clear on what you believe and why you believe it. Because here's something else. Are your beliefs yours? Or did you inherit them off someone? Are you following someone? Are you doing what they're doing? Or are you doing the opposite? I would never do that. Look how they treated me. I'm going to do this. And we're back to the pendulum swinging. Instead of taking account, and this is what we'll talk about on the next session, being accountable, being responsible for your beliefs, holding them up as your opinions, holding them up with great respect of what do I believe, and this is why I believe it.
And so the essence of what you're describing here, which is the reverse engineering or the golden thread process, which is the therapy work that you do with all your clients, you're saying, of course, acknowledge the emotions, yes, but the way off the carousel is to reverse engineer, to identify what is the thought or the self-talk behind the red light emotion and what is the belief behind the core belief, often buried in my subconscious mind or our subconscious mind, that is driving the self-talk or the thoughts in response to the situation I'm currently facing. Yes. So it's not to deny the situation, the difficulty that I'm currently facing, but what we're talking about now is managing our emotional understanding and managing and rebalancing our emotional response to any given difficult or challenging situation so that we can get off the carousel, so not escalate the emotions even more, and we can conserve our emotional and mental energy so that we can respond resourcefully and authentically to the situation we are facing in the here and now.
Yes, Alex. So we are not saying that the situation you're facing is not important, not needs your full attention. But what I am saying is when you do the golden thread, instead of being emotional responsive, when you do the golden thread and get down to your beliefs, what you believe, why you believe it, and you take accountability and responsibility for that, you are more able to act from your truth, from your honesty, from your integrity. This is what I would call your spirituality, the spirit of who you are, that inner voice, that intuition. We've done many teachings on this, your gut feeling. So you're not being dragged along on the carousel. You can step off the carousel and understand How do you deal with this situation? How do you deal with it authentically? How do you deal with it correctly? How do you connect to yourself? Now, this is what the inner child is trying to resist, because the inner child wants it their way. Didn't want this to happen at all. Don't think it should happen. They shouldn't have any difficulty in life. They can reel off so many things. Then this is when they'll give you the 3 lies. I'm not good enough. Or you're not good enough. You can't cope. You can't cope with this. I always laugh when I hear that. You cope with everything. Everything in your life. You've always coped. You're unlovable. Nobody will like you. You don't deserve this. You're unworthy. And this is when you have to do this inner child work. Because I understand this is extremely powerful, especially when it doesn't know any better. It's just screaming, and it's the inner child is not a monster. I don't want to repeat myself. It's not out to get you. It's not the devil. It's a scared, frightened little child that out of its depth, and it needs someone to hold its hand, to sit with it, and to reassure it, and to teach it a different way based on truth, honesty, and integrity, a different way where you don't have to explode, a different way where you're not being dragged along with your emotions, because you create them, and he has to understand, or she has to understand that. And that's where the real work to get off the carousel of despair, first of all, and then dissolve the carousel of despair. The carousel of despair, this daisy chain, has no part in your life. This is not who you are as a spiritual, amazing, awesome human being. As Alex has explained quite well, all it does is like a black hole for your energy, for your thinking, for your character, for who you stand for, is being dragged down through that black hole of that carousel. And you stop being yourself. You stop being this wonderful, creative, resourceful, resilient, spiritual person that you are. And you become this scared, frightened, anxiety, jumping, wondering what they're going to say, what's that going to happen, how's this going to... And this is not the way to live. And this is why these teachings are so, so important. So if this is you, please look in our resources. We've got lots of supporting teachings. If you don't understand one of the things we're talking about, you'll see a supportive lesson there explaining in more detail.
Thank you, David. And yes, I will put a link in the show notes to our Golden Thread Process video playlist, which has many, many long-form teachings on there describing in more detail the elements of this self-inquiry process, this reverse engineering process, and really to help you understand this connection between your self-talk and your beliefs and those red light emotions. And I think just by reinforcing that understanding of I'm creating these uncomfortable emotions because of what I'm thinking or believing, once you really kind of own that, that makes a huge difference, because then as soon as you experience a red light emotion as part of a normal day thing, you have that now in your conscious awareness to question what is behind that emotion.
Yes, and just to go over what we said, this is why understanding is the first step. Understanding this. And put it in your own words. Like Alex has, I use the carousel of despair. You may want to use the daisy chain word, or think up your own word. But first of all, understand what's going on. And then the second step, you use a great word, own it. I would say, accept it. You are responsible. And perhaps if you have difficulty with that one, what's the next teaching? And we'll go more into why that is very important. But once you understand it and you accept it, it then becomes yours. Now, this is much different to being the victim, because when you're a victim, you have to rely on everybody else outside of you. And that's not spiritual. That's not resourceful. That's not resilient. That's not who you are. You are an important piece of thread in this tapestry of life that we all live in. You are equally as important as anyone else. And this is why this teaching is so important. Working with your inner child, we call it reparenting. Reparenting your inner child. So you and your inner child are not in a tug of war, fighting each other, jumping on the carousel every day. You're coming together as one. And you can turn the carousel engine down, 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 until you can get rid of it altogether, because it's serving you no purpose at all.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. Well, I really hope you have enjoyed this teaching. Do let us know and perhaps share it with someone else who you think it may also benefit. Like I say, please do check out the links in the show notes that will help you with this subject. David works every week with clients all over the world via Zoom video call on exactly these sorts of issues. If you'd like to learn more about David's one-to-one consultations, I'll also put a link to those in the show notes. And finally, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We produce new long-form teachings every Saturday, as well as 2 midweek short snippets of wisdom. So don't forget to subscribe. We look forward to sharing with you again very soon. Bye-bye.